Everyone, welcome to Life Edge, because life, well, just doesn't have to be that mediocre. Joining me today is our co-host, the one and only Dr. Susan Nash. Hi, Susan. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. I'm glad to be here. We have a great guest today.
We do. Let's play our intro and then let's introduce her. Here we go. And Susan, would you like to do the honors?
I'm thrilled. I'm so happy to be able to introduce Rose Hunter, and it's a joy to have her here. She's a poet and a writer and an editor. She has studied in Australia and in Canada, and now is in Mexico on different projects. So welcome, Rose.
Thank you so much. Very happy to be here.
Well, I'd like to start with the fact that you're from Australia. Could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I'm from Australia originally. I did my BA in Australia and then left to go and live in Canada. Initially, I was just going for 1 year, but I ended up staying 10. So I really loved Canada a lot. I lived mostly in Toronto. And then after that, I came to visit Mexico a couple of times just on vacation when I was living in Toronto, and sort of fell in love with it here. So I got a job teaching English here initially. That's how I came down here.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, tell us a little bit about the time that you spent in Canada. What were the things that you were doing, and what were some of the things that you studied?
Right. Well, that's a good question. Well, I finished my BA in Australia, and so when I was in Canada, I studied irregularly, I would say. I had several ideas about doing some further degrees, so I did some courses at the University of Toronto, and I ended up doing Chaucer, I remember that quite well, and some other, I think, 16th century literature, and some modern literature, but they were just some courses. Other than that, I think, I was writing. I started writing there, and initially I was writing short stories. So I did do quite a bit of writing in Canada. That's really where I started doing that. But all that was on my own, sort of off my own accord. I didn't take courses for writing or anything. I was a bit disorganized in Canada. My life was a little bit chaotic there, so I'm trying to, impose an order on it. Yeah.
Well, what were some of your first short stories about?
Gosh, I mean, very realistic kind of slice of life stories. I was reading a lot. I really loved Nicholson Baker. I remember that was one of the people I read, I think, all of his books. And I liked that focus on, the details of everyday life. So that's really what they were about. They were relatively plotless. A lot of interior monologue.
Oh, I really like the fact that you focused on the details of everyday life. And to me, that's one thing that makes your poetry is so beautiful and touching.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very kind of you. Very kind of you. I really like what you do with. Oh, sorry?
What was your first book of poetry about, and what inspired it?
So I started writing fiction before I started writing poetry. So my first book of poems wasn't a deliberate book. I was just writing the odd poem here and there. And then I ended up having a lot of them. and I published some of them in small journals. And then something I didn't appreciate how wonderful it was until much later, but a small publisher liked my stuff and asked me whether I had a collection to kind of pull together. As I say, I didn't quite realize how special that is until much later. It doesn't happen that often. So he saw sort of a travel theme in them, and he pulled them together in terms of various destinations. And I often wrote poems when I was traveling, so they did have that aspect in common.
Oh, I love that. So the magic of investigation and exploration and discovery. And I see that and feel that. And I also would like you to tell us about your photography.
Oh, okay. It's just something I really enjoy. Having said that, I haven't done it now for a few years. My camera broke in 2015, and I haven't replaced it. So I haven't been taking many photos, but I love it, and I want to go back to it one day. I think I may have not replaced my camera deliberately because I know that I can get very carried away with photography, and I don't want to do anything else. I just want to take pictures. So I think it's prodded me to focus more on my writing. The fact that I haven't got a camera at the moment, but I'd love to do more one day. And I often used to take photos sort of in conjunction with writing, or use them I'd start describing something in a photo. Spent a lot of time sort of gazing at photos, and so I guess they were writing prompts in a way for me as well. And
I like that.
Yeah.
Were some of the, I know that some of your photographs were of Mexico, and they are close-ups or sort of careful studies of things that you would find in everyday life that people may overlook, but then you look at it closely, and things like, just the texture of paint, for example. I noticed that in a few things. But describe some of the things that you would like to photograph, and what captured your imagination.
Yeah. Well, you're exactly right. It's a really nice comment of yours. Thank you. It is the things of everyday life here. One of my favourite things is rebar for some strange reason, but having been here, you probably know that rebar sticks up on the tops of the flat concrete roof, and then the rebar is sticking out the top. And someone told me once that that's so that the house can be still considered under construction, and so you don't have to pay some tax on it. Or something. I'm not sure. It was a while ago that I was told that, so now I've forgotten. But I just like the look of it. The textures and shapes of this rebar, and sometimes it's pretty crazy, poking this way and twirling around, and so I always like that. And roofs here fascinate me because there's often laundry hanging on roofs, and there's those tinacos, the big water tanks on the roofs, and people often put bottles on the top of the rebar, and all those are fascinating shapes for me. And things that you don't see in Canada and Australia very much.
Now, you've lived in a couple of different actually several different places. What brought you down to Mexico?
I remember really well visiting Guadalajara in 2004, which was my first time in Mexico as an adult. I think I was in Tijuana or something as a child with my parents. But so I came to Guadalajara, and I just loved it. It was I think I only had 2 weeks, and I always thought I'm going to come back here, So it took me a few years to sort of get organised in that direction. And so I just applied for a teaching job. I did a TESOL course and applied for a teaching job, and got a teaching job in Tlaquepaque, which Susan probably knows, near Guadalajara. So that was initially the way I came here. Yeah.
Yeah, Guadalajara is a beautiful city. There's a lot to
Isn't it
do
lovely?
there. It's a
Yeah.
big city. Most people don't realize it's a lot of people there,
It's
and
enormous,
it has a nice
yeah. Yeah,
downtown.
you said you had some friends
I have
there.
a lot of friends who live in
Yeah.
Guadalajara area, and I remember we went to a park, Los Colomos, which was gorgeous, and
Hmm.
everybody there's tons of people working out, and just it's a nice park, and it's
Hmm.
huge. Just a lot of nice places to go. The food was good. Um, it's so funny. We always joke we were worried about getting Montezuma's revenge, and we did really well until the very last day flying back, and we ate at Chili's, the American restaurant. That's what got us sick.
Oh, that's just
It
perfect.
was perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, we avoided everything. We get killed by the American restaurant. It was funny.
Yes, yes.
Uh,
There's a lesson in that.
there
Stick to
is, there
this,
is.
the taco stands. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Tlaquepaque is a great location. There's lots of tourism and lots of
Yeah.
small markets, and it seems like a great place to teach English because you would be helping people be more effective with their small businesses.
Yeah, it was really, really beautiful location. Yeah, and the galleries and completely different in a lot of ways from where I am now in Puerto Vallarta. But yeah, lovely places in different ways. The school I taught at was a private school, so it was. Yeah, a range of people, a lot of children, which I have to say is not my teaching forte. So it was a bit challenging for me, but yeah.
Did you teach English?
I did. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yep. Kids are hard.
So then, what made you stay interested in Mexico, and how did it inspire your writing?
Yeah. Well, I've never lost interest in Mexico. I always seem to be very happy here, and yeah, I just have always felt at home here for some strange reason. In terms of staying here longer, I didn't really have a plan after the teaching ended, and so well, I had no plan, but I got on a bus and came to Puerto Vallarta because I had travelled around Mexico quite a bit, but I hadn't been there, and it was relatively close, and I was cold. I wanted to go down to sea level. So that was my lack of a plan, and I showed up in Vallarta with really no idea of what I was going to do. And I think I mentioned to Susan I had some personal challenges. At the time, I was drinking a bit much and what have you. So Vallarta was really like a godsend for me. Yeah, I came here for no particular reason and sort of found a really great home and really great friends and recovered from drinking too much and a lot of things like that.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, I'm most interested in really exploring how it affected your writing and the types of writing that you have done recently.
That have been affected by Mexico? Sorry, I didn't catch all your questions.
Or you're traveling. It just because I think that what I see, the reason for the question is I just see a very lucid, very clear writing that connects to the reader in a really unusual way, and I'm very interested in some of the things that inspire that.
Oh, okay. I got most of your question. I'm having a bit of a sound issue there, so I don't think I didn't get all the words, but I got the general gist, I think. Yeah, I wanted to say, I mean, the stuff I've read of yours, Susan, I really appreciate the sort of, well, if I'm describing it right, sort of magic realism thing that I see in it. I would like to do more of that sort of thing. And actually, I tried. I wrote a bunch of short stories like that, and none of them really turned out any good. So that was sort of an experiment. And I guess one of the things I got out of that is you can't really choose your style, you know. Your style sort of chooses you, and to a certain extent, So, yeah, a roundabout way of saying that a lot of my things come from, a lot of my inspiration does come from things I see around me. And I think, in the past, I think, well, because of the drinking, I had a fairly dramatic time, self-created drama, not quality drama. But it did provide a lot of interesting things to write about. Not doing that anymore. I have to look, in other places, which is excellent, because I can move it a little bit beyond myself. In terms of the place, I think the main thing is I feel very happy here, and I don't, or I feel at home here. So I feel a general state where I could be inspired maybe by anything because I feel good within myself, I think the one thing that stops me writing is feeling depressed or, I'm no good with that artist cliche of being terribly depressed and writing. I just won't write if I'm depressed. And yeah, feeling at home, feeling happy, feeling balanced. Obviously there are things in the culture that I find really wonderful, like, people sitting out on the street is one thing that I always appreciate here, that you walk around and there are people everywhere, and whereas I find a lot of suburbs in, Australia, United States, Canada, they're a little bit emptied out, and there's no corner stores. I have a corner store right across the road here which sells basically everything. It's wonderful. And there's always about 5 street dogs outside of it, and there's people sitting outside as well. And I really, that to me gives me a sense of life, that I feel. And I think that comes out. At the moment, I'm not writing about Mexico, I'm writing about Las Vegas, but I think that sort of, I don't know, something of that feeling of the place that I'm writing in is really the important thing, that I feel some life in the place. Yeah.
Well, the Latin culture and most of the Latin countries do have that kind of life and that joy of living.
Yeah.
And even though some of them live in misery because the Latin cultures have a lot of issues, they also enjoy it. They seem to love the misery, and they love how they live. And they love the connection between each other, and they love to. I remember when I lived in Argentina, as we talked about offline, just watching people. People love to watch people, and you can sit in a bar or in a cafe for hours and hours and hours watching people, and it's something people don't get tired of. Not to mention, it seems like there's always something to do.
Yeah, Oh, that's really interesting. I started thinking a thought and then I lost it. But I was going to ask you if you'd gone back to visit Argentina.
No, it's been right now, as of this year, it'll be 30 years since I went back. But I want to go back. I do want to go back. So one of these days, you never know. Last time we went back, I had such a problem with my documentation. I didn't want to go back because they wouldn't accept my U.S. citizenship. And it was like,
they wouldn't accept it?
It was such a pain.
They wanted to keep you?
It's because of the Falklands War. That happened 4 years before that, and anybody who became a citizen between that time, they wouldn't recognize the citizenship, and that happened to be my time frame. So when I got there, they go, nope, not an Argentine. Boom, stamp my passport, and good luck. And I called the American Embassy, no help whatsoever. I went, but I'm a citizen? No, we don't care. It was fun. It was not fun.
Well, what's interesting, this is really making me think a lot of how, I love what you're saying, Rose, about how the cliche of being miserable is really a cliche. It does not help in writing. And one of the things that I'm fascinated by is how people write thinking back on times. For example, Isaac Denison in Out of Africa. She didn't write it while she was in Africa, but she wrote this beautiful, beautiful novel about her experiences there. And it's just one of many examples. I was thinking, Rose, you never know. You're writing about Las Vegas, but you're in a different place. I mean, I think maybe it's good to have that distance.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard that. I've heard that a lot. That's well, yeah, it's what a lot of writers do, right? Is not write about the place they're in right that moment, but have that distance, like you say, and write about it a few years later. This is probably the first time, the book that I'm writing now is probably the first time I've actually done that. I've always done the opposite. I've written a lot of stuff for better or for worse, but I've written it sort of in the heat of the moment, actually. Obviously, I've edited it later, but I've written a lot of first drafts of things, at least very close to the time it's happening. So this is the first time I'm actually writing about 2 years ago. It was 2 years ago that I was in Las Vegas. And it's a different experience, and I like it. I think it's an improvement. I like it better. I feel like it's less kind of solipsistic or something. Like I'm getting a bit more distance. I'm more interested in things beyond myself for it. We'll see how it turns out, but I have that feeling about it. And then again, there's something to be said about being the intensity of being really close to the thing that you're describing and having absolutely no distance. And I think that comes across in a certain intensity of narration. Yeah.
Oh, I totally agree. Oh, how interesting.
Oh, how about you? What's your experience with that? Do you write sort of in the thick of the moment, or do you wait and get some distance and then write?
I do both too. I try to keep journals and write about things that are going on. And then recently I've been so tired of typing. I've been using speech to text to record thoughts and narrate things. And I will say that I'm thinking that it has its pros and cons. First of all, it takes a lot of editing because there are all kinds of errors in spelling and things.
Yeah.
But in terms of emotional intensity, it's fascinating because I find that I have a hard time hanging on to the feelings. I easily go into intellectualizing and pontificating and being really boring.
That's really interesting.
I'm working on things.
I've never tried that. I've never tried putting something in a tape recorder or anything like that. I think, maybe there's something in the tactile, even if the tactile thing now is just tapping on keys. Still, you're touching something to.
And it seems to be a different way for our brain to work. Because if you look at tools like Dragon, Naturally Speaking, or any one of those tools, unless you're really, really, really good at coming up with paragraphs, especially if you're writing fiction or stories, you're going to stop yourself thinking. And the recorder just kind of listens to you and doesn't say anything and has no idea where you're going. You may not have an idea where you're going. And it's really hard to dictate that because it's evolving as it goes. And somehow when we're typing it, we're not thinking out loud in the same way. It's a little bit different. I find the dictation for text messages, for emails, good. But for writing and serious writing or long writing, bad. So it just really depends on. Some people can do it.
I'd feel guilty if I was reading something and I need to just stop and contemplate for a minute.
Well, imagine you're writing about a scene. You're looking at the scene. It was a beautiful day back in August of something or other. And the waves were coming in. As the waves came in, and all of a sudden you're thinking too much and you're starting to remember, what did I just write? What did I just say?
I like that. But what I do is I just do a pause. And I use Google Voice, and I often dictate email to myself so it comes in an email, because I've noticed that it's better than Dragon in terms of not making as many mistakes. But I'm starting to train Dragon. But I can pause it, but one thing that inspired me was the fact that Barbara Cartwright, I mean, I won't say that she's a great example of literature, but she dictated everything to her secretary. And I thought, hey, she didn't have to type or write anything.
Interesting.
I've heard authors doing it when, for some reason, like vision problems, right? Or some kind of sickness. I've heard of a lot of authors doing it more like towards the end of their career when they have some medical issues, something like that. But now I can't think of any specific examples off the top of my head, but I always thought that would be difficult to dictate. Dictate a whole novel. Can you imagine?
Yeah. Milton was one. Milton, and he was blind, and then also Borges.
Oh, Borges, yes, he was.
Well, yeah, brilliant people. yeah, interesting. It's really good to see you in person, Susan, as well, because we've had emails on and off for a few years, but have never spoken in person, so it's really nice. Just wanted to say that.
I really appreciate it, and I'm hoping that maybe we can meet sometime. If I mean, I like to go to Mexico, and I'm often in Puerto Vallarta. Maybe we could meet.
Yeah, I would love to see you here. Yeah.
Good. You will be sorry. I will show up.
I won't be sorry. No.
Well, we're about at the end of our time. Susan, do you want to ask that infamous question?
Okay, so we have a title of our show. It's Life Edge. So the last question is always, Rose, what do you think it is that has given you an edge in your life, or what helps you have an edge in life?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, my first response is I don't think I have an edge. If I have any sort of edge, maybe it's persistence. I think. I think maybe I would say persistence. I wish I was better prepared for this question.
Wait, no, persistence is a pretty good edge.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, but persistence is a good one.
It's been negative too, because I've persisted with some pretty bad ideas also. But now I'm seeing more the flip side of it, that I can also persist with better ideas. Yeah.
That sounds good. Well, Rose,
it's
been a pleasure having you on the show and talking a little bit about your life and your experiences, your travels. It sounds like you've done some interesting things, and we appreciate you coming on. And Susan?
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you both so much. Thank you, Susan, for inviting me, and both of you are welcome to visit me in Puerto Vallarta as well.
Sounds good. A beautiful place to go too. Yeah. Well, thank you much.
Interview, Rose. We really apprient it.
And for you folks,
I appreciate it a lot. Yeah.
And for you folks watching, send us feedback. Is there any way people can get in touch with you? Maybe go to your website. We'll put your website links on the on the show notes.
Yep. My website has my email on there too, or if you go to the editing site, I think both of them have my email on them actually.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next week on Life Edge. Have a good one, everyone. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thank you.